sometimes more effectively, on the oboe. For myself, I am happier trying to write good oboe parts than bravura parts for the trombone.
Richard Hughes, on the strength of two novels, is one of the most widely read of living English novelists. His first book, A HighWind in Jamaica, a story about children, was written over 30 years ago. And the second, In Hazard, a story about the sea, over 20 years ago. Both of these are now classics. Now he has broken his long silence with a new novel, The Fox in the Attic. It's the first volume of what he describes as a long historical novel of my own times. It's to be called The Human Predicament. The Fox in the Attic combines history and fiction in a way and with a success which I think have very rarely been equaled. Its effect is even more extraordinary because Richard Hughes has inserted into his own narrative his own philosophical reflections on the world in which his characters live and move and have their being. We first meet the hero, a young man, as he emerges out of the mist on a sea marsh in Wales. And this first chapter has an airy power which throws a shadow forward on everything which comes later. For the hero goes to visit some German relations, and his visit coincides with the abortive putsch by which Adolf Hitler tried to seize power in Munich in 1923. This is an historical novel, but many of us have lived through its history, and this book made me feel involved in the actual process of the history itself. After I had read The Fox in the Attic, I very much wanted to know how Richard Hughes came to select this particular form for his novel. Now, Dickon.
It came to me in the middle of the war. I thought that here was I'd been a writer all my life. I was living through one of the most interesting periods in human history. And if I turned my back on it, it was rather as if Homer had turned his back on the siege of Troy.
And I'm glad you felt like that, because I think this first volume is absolutely magnificent. Do you think you yourself think that you have done what you meant to achieve in the first volume?
I thought I'd get much further in the first volume. I've only covered about 2 months.
And the whole book will take a cover from...
The whole book covers from 1923 till the end of the war.
That's a long time, and I take it you will have to cover a great deal more ground in some of the volumes than in this one.
Oh, yes.
Have you thought out how you're going to... Have you thought out how you're going to do it?
No.
Not
I haven't thought it out. Because I can't write if I'd got a thing completely planned out, I should feel there was no need to write it.
And does it always come as a surprise to you what comes next?
Well, of course, in a historical novel, naturally one knows the history, because that one doesn't change. But the incidents grow out of each other. One has just about as much foresight as one has in ordinary life.
Which do you think is the most important, or is it a silly question? Do you think the characters are the more important, or the history? Or are they absolutely apart, one of the other?
Well, again, I don't want to sound grandiloquent, but to use the analogy of the Iliad, which is more important, the character of Achilles or the siege of Troy?
I think it'd be impossible to say, and I think in some respects you have managed to wed the two together in exactly the same way, and I find that absolutely fascinating. But was there any particular incident with which you started? I mean, was there anything that initially gave you the spur to start? Because it's a huge subject.
Yes, it is. You mean, did I intend to start with the Hitler putsch?
Yes.
Yes, I did intend that much.
And the scene at the beginning, which I think is so good.
The scene at the beginning of the...
Which is so distant from the Hitler putsch.
Yes, well, that was written in quite a different way, because I was writing in the garden of a small village inn in Spain. I began to write describing a sea marsh on the southwest Welsh coast, and then I saw two figures approaching. I had no idea who they were. And presently I saw to my astonishment what one of them was carrying over his shoulder.
With the dead girl.
Hmm.
And it was simply given to you like this?
It was given to me like that, and I went on from there.
One thing of this book, you know, it really is as if it were a defence of yourself, but I don't think it is a defence as needed, that you're a very slow writer. In what particular kind of way are you a slow writer? How do you go about it?
Well, to begin with, as I say, the idea of doing this came to me in the middle of the war, and it was only about 5 or 6 years ago that I actually began to write. It's true I'd been writing other things in between. I did a bit of official history and I'd written some film scripts. But all the time I was turning this over in my mind, wondering. It took me some time to settle on it, the historical novel as the shape for it.
And of course it has, as well as writing a history of our times. I mean, you're also writing a history of the soul in our times.
Yes. Well, I mean, you can't separate the two, surely.
No, but it's very rare these days to find a work of fiction exploring such an enormous and serious theme.
Well, you mean you're suggesting that people are turning away from fiction now?
Well, I think then don't expect from it such a serious treatment of life as you are.
A generation which prefers non-fiction to fiction is fundamentally a frivolous generation.
Do you think that's really true, Jim?
I do indeed. Well, it's in a very uneconomical, wasteful way, really. Because I know the proper thing to do is to plan out carefully ahead just how you're going to write. You can even write chapter 15 first if you feel like it that morning. But I can't write that way. I never have been able to. Chapter 1 has turned out like before I can know what chapter 2 ought to be. So that I revise a tremendous lot as I go along.
Yes, I see.
So write chapter 1, revise it. From that, get a feeling of how chapter 2 should shape. It's more like something growing than carpentry.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, now, in this book, for instance, you interpolate some long, direct disquisitions on the scene that you are describing by yourself, and philosophical commentary, more or less. Do those come to you as you're going along? Do you feel now this is the place where...
Well, I've been hauled over the coals for this by several people. I felt that I had to make the thing explicit at that point instead of simply implicit, and that it would save a lot of time and space later on, because once the bare bones of it were in the reader's mind, then they would quickly pick up the instances and the variations on that theme later on, without having to explain later on each time.
Yes, I see. After all, you're in very good company with these philosophical interpolations. I mean, Tolstoy was also hauled over the coals for it, and a great many people believe that he was wrong to do so, but I've always thought he was right, and I think you're right in this case, too. But as for the actual content of what you say in these, you have this idea that there is this division between the individual and the sort of ambience of the society around him, and that there is a balance between them of love and hate, that in some way this was destroyed by the Great War. Is that...
It isn't quite that. It is that the one's personality is not, as one first tends to suppose, limited to your I. I mean, everybody is conscious that he is an I, and he's inclined to suppose that the limits of his I are the limits of his personality. But what, in fact, in that case, do we mean by the words we and my and mine? Surely those are overflows from the central I into the